I cannot talk about Anastasia.
Yeah, I lied. Now, here's the thing. 20th Century Fox's Anastasia is the comfort movie for me. It was such a staple in my household that I assumed everyone had watched it at some point. I had the VHS tape as a kid, I played it 100 times, I could recite this thing by heart. I like leaving films as background noise while I work on different projects, and Anastasia is the one that I turn to the most often. So I figured I was too close to it to analyze it fairly, as though my own nostalgic love for this masterpiece would blind my every attempt at forming a cohesive sentence. But here's the tricky thing about growing up with a movie. It only sticks with you if it was somehow relevant to you. I also had VHS tapes that I straight up didn't watch because they were incredibly boring. Yeah, I'm looking at you, dinosaur. If Anastasia caught my attention as a kid and continued to catch my attention over the years, I figured there had to be something about it. And because I have been cursed with a tendency to overthink everything, I caught myself thinking about Anastasia a lot. And I realized that the reasons why I love this movie go beyond mere nostalgic attachment. Anastasia is the perfect rom-com. It is also a weird 90s time capsule, an enchanting fairy tale, and a treasure trove of historical inaccuracies. How could a movie like this even begin to work? Well, that's what I wish to explore. Join me on this journey as I look into the best animated musical of all time, because I want to talk about Anastasia. Anastasia is a movie by Don Bluth and Gary Goldman released in 1997. It takes the real historical event of the Russian Revolution of the early 20th century and explores one urban legend surrounding the assassination of the royal family. The idea that a young princess Anastasia had somehow survived the attack. From then, the story becomes a sort of speculation on what the girl's life would have been like as she tried reuniting with her grandmother in Paris. I shouldn't be the one to tell you that this movie is not historically accurate, and the film itself is making no attempt at hiding that idea. I am not here to compare this fantasized version of the facts to the actual events that took place over a century ago, as the plot itself is pretty much removed from any sense of realistic documentation. Still, we get some semblance of reality as we open with a shot of the royal palace, while a voiceover narration provided by Anastasia's grandmother tells us of the world of luxury and grandeur that the family used to inhabit. And I mean, she isn't kidding. These visuals look stunning. We are also introduced to a young Anastasia, who receives a music box as a gift from her grandmother. Their happiness doesn't last for long though, as an evil sorcerer known as Rasputin has crashed the party, threatening to bring forth the demise of the Romanov family. Because that's my favorite part of the Russian Revolution, the part where it was caused by an evil wizard. Yeah, really don't bother with the accuracy thing. As the riots grow, Anastasia and her grandmother escape the palace with the help of a kitchen boy, and Rasputin falls through the ice before he can end the Romanov lineage. However, while the two royals flee the country, Anastasia is separated from her grandmother, and the narration finishes with the lady telling us of how she never saw the princess again. Only then we get our title screen, and what a glorious impression it makes. We pan over luscious white clouds and a clear blue sky, the name of the movie shining in the same golden hues as the glistening towers that peek over the horizon, a vigorous singing chorus resounding through the soundtrack while we approach the site. The voices follow us during our descent, crossing through the cloudy barrier, landing in a darkened landscape of smog and snow, soaring through decaying buildings surrounded by factories and construction sites. When only minutes ago we had prosperous golds and yellows, we are now faced with sickening oranges, the sparkling of lights and jewels replaced by a grim, worn-out world, a mere shadow of its former self. The plunge from the heavens into the earth indicates this departure from opulence into struggling, from the royal and extravagant into the bleak and the mundane. This is where we find not only our main characters, but also Russia itself. And we see that, with 10 years having gone by since the revolution, despite the apparent harshness of this new state of things, the people still manage to keep their spirits high, as we jump right into an energized musical number over how the people deal with their country's situation, as well as the spreading rumors of Anastasia's survival, with her grandmother offering a huge money prize for the one who can reunite her with the living princess. It is here that we meet the boys, Vlad and Dmitri, the first having once been a member of the old imperial court and the latter being the kitchen boy from the preface, now forming a pair of conmen planning to train a young lady to act like Anastasia so that they can take the cash and run free. As we later come to learn, this is not exactly an original idea, but Dmitri just so happens to have the music box that once belonged to the young royal, pretty much guaranteeing that whatever girl they train will seem like the real thing. Meanwhile, ever since that fateful night, our princess now goes by Anya and has been raised in an orphanage, having no recollection of who she is except for a vague notion that she should head to Paris to meet her family, based on the one gift that she was able to keep from her royal days. She needs to falsify some travel papers in order to leave the country, which points her in the direction of one handsome young man who can get her those documents. But she just so happens to look a lot like a certain princess, and he just so happens to be searching for a young lady who can play that exact part. So here we have the basic premise for our story. Dmitri wishes to present Anya as Anastasia, taking her to Paris to see her grandmother who so desperately searches for her family. Anya goes along with this plan as the two lads play into her innocence by suggesting that she just might be the long-lost princess, and since she has no other clue about her past, she figures it's worth a shot, even if she has no idea that this is all just a plan to get the reward. While all of this is happening, Rasputin figures out that Anastasia didn't die, and he comes up with many nefarious plans to fulfill his curse of eliminating the royal bloodline. Back when this movie came out, everyone was calling it a fairy tale, which is fair. It's your classic rags to riches story. This poor orphan girl goes on a magical journey and eventually discovers that she is a princess, now having access to a world of treasures and dresses and even her own Prince Charming. But we've all seen fairy tales. Disney was doing fairy tales, and they were really good at doing that. And fairy tales don't usually start with, well, the Russian Revolution, even if it is a rather cartoonified version of that. And we've seen Don Bluth do a fairy tale before with Thumbelina, and this feels different. Because Anastasia is a rom-com. And in order for a rom-com to work, you need to have a good romance. Which is why I am happy to say that Anya and Dmitri give me life. Let's look at Anya first. She was born a princess, sure, but she was raised mostly as a commoner, and she grew up to have a mind of her own. She can be quite stubborn and isn't afraid of standing up for herself. So when you pair her with a guy who is just as outspoken, they are bound to bicker at each other. But there's also a hidden vulnerability to her character, and it comes from her undying wish to discover her family. This is what motivates her to abandon the life she knew and search for her destiny in a different country. What convinces her of participating in Dmitri's plan of pretending to be the long-lost princess isn't the promise of wealth and status, but the idea that she might finally find where she belongs. And while Dmitri might act cool and practical throughout his journey, the truth is, he is just as lost and alone as Anya. There's this really nice scene where the gang's on a train heading out of Russia, and Anya asks Dmitri if he is going to miss it, to which he claims that he won't. Anya is shocked to hear this, and even more so when he tells her that he doesn't plan on making Paris his new home either, making him question why Anya is so obsessed with the idea of having a home at all. Those are two characters who have yet to find their place in the world. But while Anya relies on her relentless hope of completing that search, Dmitri shuts off that idea entirely. And you really understand where each of them is coming from. Anya had to rely on her dreams in order to keep going, never losing her spirits despite her lonely upbringing. And Dmitri was never given a chance to belong at all. He grew up working in the palace, surrounded by a world that outright rejected people like him. And after the revolution happened, any sense of stability he could have had was shattered. These two complement each other really nicely, striking a great balance between being surprisingly similar and also polar opposites. And with this being a 90s movie, you know this is going to lead to a lot of bickering before they ultimately confess their feelings. I will admit, I'm not usually a fan of this trope. The whole idea that if someone is rude to you, it means that they secretly love you is not something that I want to support, and usually the switch from hate to love happens totally out of nowhere. But here, I can fully get behind it, because these characters are given time and space to know each other and fully develop their relationship. It's a long journey from Russia to Paris, and since they are basically working together towards a common goal, they have a reason to interact and good motivation to try and trust each other. Not to mention, an evil wizard is actively trying to kill one of them, and after staring death in the eye together for like the third time this week, you're bound to get a little closer to your travel mates. And this movie is filled with nothing but the most beautiful rom-com tropes. The initial squabbling, the makeover scene, the clumsy learning how to waltz moment, the misunderstanding where it all falls apart before the fiery love confession at the end. This is art in its purest form. It's the reason why cinema was invented. But a mere couple does not a great movie make. Lucky for us, the rest of the characters are just as interesting. Vlad is what remains of this glorious old Russia, and he has this great friendship with Dmitri. You never really learn how the two started working together, but they function so well with each other that you don't have trouble understanding why they formed this partnership. There's also Sophie, a royal family cousin, whose bouncy personality is a real treat to watch. The grandmother is another great figure. There's such a tragicness to her. Searching for her grandchild brings her a great deal of pain, forcing her to face the nature of her loss at every turn. But it's the one thing that still gives her a reason to keep on living. And, oh man, let's talk about Rasputin. The choice of making him some sort of evil wizard who struck a deal with the forces of the underworld to bring the royal family down is interesting, but most importantly, he carries the difficult task of being both the antagonist of the film and also one of its main sources of comedy. And that's a tricky line to tread. If you go too far on one side, he comes off as too menacing, and on the other side, he's way too goofy. To me, the way the movie handles this issue is perfectly represented by his physical comedy, which comes from how his body is falling apart from having taken too long to fully enact his curse. He is basically a walking corpse, with random limbs popping off and with how his head falls into his empty, organless body, and it's always so close to being irredeemably gross, but it never pushes it too far. It's iconic in its own weird way, and it makes it for a really entertaining villain. The fun in his presence also comes from his dynamic with his sidekick Bartok, a little white bat who kinda wants Rasputin to let go of his grudge against the royals and just live his undead life. If you're going to have a villain that is this over the top, it makes sense to have his counterpart be the voice of reason, and it's very funny to see this little guy walk around telling an evil wizard to chill. All of these characters, no matter how cartoony they can be at times, feel very fleshed out. There's a certain realness to them, a very down-to-earth quality, which is also something that I felt while watching Titan AE. And this credibility comes not only from the way they are written, but also from the animation itself. While the movie was being made, several scenes were filmed in live action as a reference before being translated to 2D, and the crew managed to strike an amazing fusion of realism and artistic exaggeration. The very world of this movie feels like a fantasy, but at the same time grounded and well established. There are so many details which I absolutely adore. Take the first musical number, for instance, where we get a better glimpse of the city. You see all of these makeshift markets popping up in the decaying royal buildings, showcasing the new form this country has taken after the revolution. Take also how Vlad and Dmitri walk through those very markets, passing by vendors selling items that were supposedly taken from the palace. The lads ignore most of them, except for this one man claiming to sell authentic royal fur coats. And you can see Dmitri place the piece over Vlad's own coat before deciding to buy it. Because Vlad was once a member of the court, and the piece that the man was selling matched the con man's exactly, making it probably one of the only real items on that market. It's such clever foreshadowing of Vlad's place as an ex-royal, and it shows that Dmitri himself knows luxury when he sees it, and it goes by so quickly. Or when Anya is waiting to meet her grandmother, and she attends the same play as the old lady so that Dmitri has an excuse to introduce them later. The ballet they are watching is a retelling of Cinderella, the fairy tale that is most often compared to the story that Anastasia is a part of. Or how, at this moment, Anya has been traveling with the conman for weeks, getting more and more involved with the idea that she might as well be a princess, surrendering herself to this fiction in the name of her dreams of finding a family. And the moment when Dimitri's plan is revealed to be a farce happens during the intermission of the play, right when Cinderella loses her glass slipper. In other words, the moment when the magic ends and she must return to her peasant life, much like Anya's dream was ruthlessly shattered. And sure, some of the stuff I say can be seen as me thinking way too hard about this movie, which admittedly I am, but you also have to consider the fact that Bluth and Goldman put a lot of thought into what you should pay attention to.
CinemaScope gives you a bigger world. It's epic in scope. You show more. And so when it comes time for those quiet, little intimate scenes where you just want to get close to the character and you want to be in really tight, you still have this huge, big stage, which is sort of counterproductive to the intimacy. But the way around it is to take the lights down and keep lit only that tiny little place where you want us to inhabit or to live.
There's this recurring movement in the film of focusing the attention on Anya's face, letting a single beam of light shine at her eyes, keeping our attention there. This happens whenever the young woman seems to consider something of great importance to her, and through these moments, you can see how her priorities shift throughout the story. At first, the light shines whenever Anya muses over the concept of family. Her eyes light up when she dreams of being the long-lost princess, for it means that she has a chance of reuniting with the family she once might have had. As she stands by a portrait of her kid self, the same light illuminates the painted figure, equating the woman standing under it to the child surrounded by her relatives. Later, the same light hits her when she remembers how she escaped the palace, thanks to the boy who let her walk through the walls. Here, she dreams of two things: the family she once had and the man who helped her escape, not knowing that she has already found him. When the light hits her again, it's just as she is about to confess her feelings for Dmitri before they both back down. The object of her desire is no longer a vague idea of family, tied to people she has no memory of. Instead, the feeling is directed at the person with whom she has bonded over the course of the film. Here, Anya has finally found the love she so desperately chased. And through these scenes, we see how Anya's perspective changes across her journey. What started as a wish for a family she didn't even know was real was fully realized into a need for genuine connection, a relationship that is built over time and trust instead of a static dream she can just waltz into. Anya's need for love moved from an unachievable realm of fantasy into the grounded world of the reality she has crafted for herself. The whole thing with family and belonging is one of the major themes of this film, and I really like the way it's handled. Anya wants to find love and learns to base it not on a memory from a long-forgotten past, but instead on the real connections that she forms. At the same time, her grandmother realizes that even though finding Anya was a dream come true, they are both going to be happier if the girl is free to choose her own destiny instead of being chained to the royal life. And there's peace in knowing that your loved ones are living their best life even if you're not physically close to them. And much like the princess, Dmitri also finds a home in the person he has grown to love. And the music. Oh boy. You don't get the title of greatest animated musical of all time if your music doesn't bring its A game. Look at this! They should make a stage version of this! Oh wait, the sheer glistening spectacle of Once Upon a December was so unbelievably formative for my personal aesthetics. 5-year-old me was not ready to be blown away by such audio-visual splendor. And we haven't even discussed the wonderful contrivedness of this movie's premise. Essentially, they are teaching a princess how to be a princess, and no one but the audience is aware of that fact. And the people who are teaching this young girl about the ways of royalty are the furthest thing away from royal, being just two random scam artists living in the ruins of an abandoned palace. Not to mention how the guy who saved the princess's life is now returning her to her family, all while secretly snickering to himself about how this is the cleverest con in history. I love it. I love every second of it. They kill the evil wizard and live happily ever after. God, I love this movie. I understand this film is not above criticism. As amazing as the animation can be, it just isn't without its flaws. The background characters sometimes move and sometimes just don't. There's this part where Dmitri gets Anya a dress and they messed up while coloring it, like on the same scene. And then when Anya shows up wearing it, it's not even the same dress. And despite how great the romance is, I think it would have been nice if the movie had focused a little bit more on the found family aspect of Anya's journey, instead of relying exclusively on the idea of romantic love. But I'll let it slide. I'll let it all slide. I love this movie. It has captured my heart for like 2 decades at this point, and I'm sure it will remain in my top 5 most watched movies until the end of time. In trying to create a fairy tale that could rival what other companies were doing, Anastasia managed to create its own magical universe, precisely for how beautifully grounded it ended up being. It's both timeless and a product of its time. The tropes and tendencies it falls back on, so iconic to the decade of its production, coupled with its own absurd interpretation of reality, walk hand in hand with an utterly captivating cast of characters in order to create an experience that is sure to win you over. Yeah, I love it, but that's because there's a lot that deserves to be loved. And hopefully this video helped you love this movie a little more too. But it's not like this film needed my help. Thank you for watching. Well, hello there. It was very nice of you to watch this video. Special thanks to my beautiful patrons for making videos like these possible. You guys are my long-lost Russian royals. If you have enjoyed the video, you can also help me out by clicking the like button, subscribing to the channel, clicking the notification bell, and all that good stuff. You can also follow me on Twitter and share this video with your friends. Feel free to leave a comment down below, especially if it is about how much you love Anastasia. This movie was a huge part of my childhood, and I'm very happy to be able to discuss it with you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!
Grandma, it's me, Anastasia.
Oh, brother.